My name is Calvin Sneed. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. Don't spread that around because everybody thinks I was born in the South because I have an accent. But no, I was born in Cleveland. I stayed in Cleveland about 6 months. And then I was brought to Tennessee from Cleveland. So, but I lived in Cleveland, like I say, 6 months. Came to Tennessee, the Nashville area. Came to my grandparents' farm, lived there 5 years. And then my mother got married to a guy from Kingsport, Tennessee. And that's how I ended up in Kingsport. I came to Kingsport in the latter part of 1959.
Tell me about your grandparents.
On which side? Grandmother, grandfather?
The farm that
Mother.
you found to live on.
That was my mother's family. My mother's family was the Johnson family in Marshall County, Tennessee. They only had 100 acres of land, but they were one of the largest African-American owned farms in Marshall County, Bedford County, Murray County, Giles County, Lincoln County, that area. And my grandfather worked the farm himself, he and his 3 sons. My mother had a big family. They had 16 kids in that family. And in that family were 4 sets of twins. They had 2 identical sets of twins, one paternal and then one fraternal set of twins. And my mother was one of the identical sets. So I've got a cousin, my mother's twin sister's son, that looks exactly like me.
Do you know where your mother's parents, your grandparents on your mother's side, do you know where they're buried at?
They are buried in the Mount Carmel Cemetery in Chapel Hill, Tennessee, close to the farm, about a couple of miles maybe from the original farm. The farm is about to become a legacy farm because it's been in my mother's family for almost 100 years. And at the present time, it's in my name. So that keeps the family line going.
Do you know their names? Your
Uh,
grandmother's parents' names?
grandmother's parents.
Your mother's parents. Your
Okay, yeah. William Randall Johnson is my grandfather. On my mother's side, they called him Wish Johnson. I don't know where that came from. He passed away when he was 58 years old, in 1958. So everybody who knows him and knew of him that could explain where he got the name Wish, they're all gone now. But my mother's or grandmother's name was Mary Lucille. Was it Venable? Mary Lucille. Because all I've ever known is she was Johnson. She got married to him and she became Johnson. But her maiden name was Bates. Her first name was her last name was, she was born Lucille Bates, but she became Lucille Venable when her parents, the mother passed away. No, that's not right. The father passed away and the mother married a Venable, so she became a Venable at that point. And then she married my grandfather in 1930, I want to say 32, something like that.
What about your?
And that's my mother's side.
What about your dad's side of the family?
Father's side of the family, my grandfather's name was Horace M. Sneed. We've done a history on him with Ancestry.com. His family is from Henderson, Kentucky. All of that part of the Sneeds all were from Henderson and Henderson County, Kentucky. Before that, their lineage goes back to, let's see, what is I want to say Caswell County, North Carolina. No, Granville, Granville County, North Carolina, and a plantation there. Richard Sneed owned slaves. And before that, the lineage goes back to England. So we've actually gone back that far in the family line on my father's side, back to England that way. They're all buried, my mother and grandfather, Horace M. Sneed and Elizabeth Sneed, are buried in Kingsport at Oak Hill Cemetery. His mother and father are buried in Henderson, Kentucky. His father's name was Junius Sneed, and that seems to be that name is either historic to the family or it was just a popular name, because my grandfather's father was named Junius Sneed, and they just, whenever they'd have a son, they named him Junius. And then they'd have other kids too, and they'd name them something else, but there was always a Junius in there somewhere. So it got down as far as my grandfather's brother in Henderson, who was named Junius Sneed. Now, unfortunately, to carry that line on, his son passed away not too long ago, I guess maybe 5-6 years ago, and that stopped the succession of Junius Sneed at that point. But it went back like 4 or 5 generations before that. And again, they're buried in Henderson, Kentucky. His wife was Lula Morton Sneed. Her people are all from Granville County, North Carolina. And that's where the Sneeds met. That's where they picked up from, and then moved to Henderson, Kentucky. My father is actually my adopted father. My parents got married in 1959 in Nashville, and I was already born, because my original father, is actually what I think was an Army sergeant at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And my mother at the time was teaching in Clarksville. She taught school. She was going to become a teacher, and she was getting her bachelor's degree and her master's degree from Tennessee State University in Nashville. So her teaching assignment was at Burt High School in Clarksville. One of her pupils was Wilma Rudolph, the runner, the Olympic runner. And that's where my mother met Truman Pierce, who was my real father. And I've only seen one picture of him. I know what he looks like, but I have no knowledge of him because I never met him. I have no idea what he looks like. I know what he looks like from that one picture, but short of that, I have no other knowledge of him. And so that's how I ended up on the farm in Lewisburg, was because I went to live with my grandparents while my mother continued teaching school. And then she met Horace P. Sneed, who adopted me and gave me a last name. And then we ended up in Kingsport because his parents lived here. Of course, as I say, she was one of a twin. They were both born. My mother was born in Farmington, Tennessee, and delivered by a midwife. Somehow my grandmother, the midwife couldn't get to the farm when my mother and her twin were being born. So my grandmother, they put her on a wagon. I mean, she had 16 kids, right? Most of them were born on the farm, but some, because the midwife would come to the farm and just stay until she had, the kids were ready to be born. But at this particular time, the midwife was still in Farmington, about 6-7 miles away. So they put my grandmother in a wagon and took her to the midwife in Farmington, where she helped my grandmother birth the kids. And she went to, we know that she went to and graduated from Farmington Rosenwald High School, the Farmington Rosenwald School. They're in Marshall County, and she always wanted to be a teacher, so she went to Tennessee State and majored in education. Got her teaching certificate while she was there because they were looking for teachers. I mean, they needed teachers, and they were just the schools that had teaching candidates were just cranking them out, and they would give them teaching certificates if they had passed certain classes that they would have to become teachers. And then she could take the other classes whenever she could, but she'd already have her teaching certificate. Well, once you get that, schools were hiring like crazy. So she got on at Burt High School in Clarksville and eventually got her master's from Tennessee State while she was there. How that happened, I have no idea, because they are just two polar opposites. I love them to death, but they were just totally mismatched. I don't know what she saw in him. I don't know what he saw in her. You know, she liked Kingsport. She came to Kingsport to work here after she married him, again, because his parents were here. My grandparents, they lived over here on Dunbar Street. And then she got a job. She was offered a job while she was still in Clarksville, right around the time they got married. She got a job offer to come to Kingsport, where his parents were, to teach at Douglas Elementary School in Kingsport. And so when she had a ready job when she got here, and she joined several other young teachers her age, who had just moved to Kingsport to teach at this school, at Douglas Elementary School, and also Douglas High School. So they were all, that's the one thing they all shared. None of them were from here. None of them had relatives here other than what they married, but they came here because it was a job. It was a teaching job here.
What year was that?
That was between 1958 and well, I take that back. That was between 1956 and 1960. They had an exodus of teachers come in here that replaced some of the other teachers who had been here for a long time. The population was exploding in this community, in the Riverview community. Kids out the wazoo. I mean, everybody was having having kids like crazy. And of course they had to be educated. Back then it was separate but equal. And they had built this school 10 years prior in the early 50s. And they needed someone to teach. And they put the word out, and V.O. Dobbins, the principal, he was doing teaching interviews just like that. And if you had, some of those interviews were 5 or 10 minutes long. If he saw that you had the credentials to teach, you're hired. When do you want to start? Because we need you now. I can tell you about the church for sure. The Central Baptist Church here in Riverview was the largest African American church in Kingsport. All of the other churches in Kingsport sprang from that church because it was so big. And everybody at one point in my family, everybody in my family had some role to do in the church. That's the way the minister was, Reverend Stokely. He'd been minister since the 30s. And he felt like families need to be involved in the church. Every family member, from the mother, the father, the grandmother, grandfather, aunt, uncle, kids, grandkids, cousins, he would find a way for you to work in the church. So as a result, my grandfather, my father's father, was a deacon. His wife played the organ and the piano. Their son, my father, my adopted father, was the school superintendent for the Sunday school. My mother was one of the school teachers. Their son, Calvin, me, was the head of the youth department. And my sister, the youngest one, the youngest Sneed, sang in the children's choir. Everybody had a role. He insisted on that. And that's the way it was. It wasn't just our family. Every family that went to that church, he would find something. Everybody had a title. This is your job. This is what you do in the church for the church.
So, how long did your mother teach? And after integration, did she have to do something else, or was she able to stay within the school system?
She stayed in the school system. When Douglas integrated in 1966, they closed it for good. All of the teachers at Douglas were given the opportunity to stay inside the city, the Kingsport City School System, if they chose to. A lot of them didn't. A lot of them left. They either went teaching somewhere else or they just stopped teaching altogether. But my mother opted to stay in the school system. She became a physical education teacher at 4 of the previously white elementary schools in Kingsport that were now integrated. And she did that for years and years and years, and she retired from that. The last school she worked at was Jefferson Elementary here in Kingsport. And she retired from there. She contracted cancer and had to leave abruptly, and she lived about a year and a half after that. She's buried, she and my father are both buried at Oak Hill Cemetery in Kingsport.
And that's with her.
His parents, yeah. In fact, there's a plot in between both of them. Grandparent, mother, father, and then there's a plot right here in between them.
That's your plot.
Tried to get that, but come to find out somebody else is buried there.
Okay.
I would just assume they weren't, but I have no say-so over that. But I do have the plot in front of them.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your dad.
He was a businessman, owned a business. One of the few African Americans in Kingsport that actually owned his own business. It was Sneed's Cleaning Service, and basically they cleaned rugs, upholstered furniture. They sand down hardwood floors, things like that, waxed them, that sort of thing. And he had several contracts. He was under contract to several of Kingsport's businesses with his business for janitorial service. The former IBM building on Center Street was his contracted workplace. He also worked for Eastman in some of the Eastman offices. The Kingsport Times-News was one of his clients. And there were some other buildings around town. But he basically, people would hire him. They would call him up and schedule an appointment, to have a rug cleaned or a piece of furniture cleaned. And I used to have to go with him to do that. I didn't like it. Not at all. I did not care for it at all. I felt like I had a bigger calling, and I got into television. I always had an interest in television, so I knew that this was one business that was not going to get passed down to the son, because I'm not doing that. I always had this thing about public speaking. There was something. It always made me nervous, and I think that doing it helped me get over that, so that I could have a career in that at some point. I would do things in church, that I could speak, public speaking, like even just something as simple as reading the scripture out loud to the group in church. I felt like that was helping me to, first of all, get over the fear I had for speaking in front of people, and I still have that fear, by the way. Television did not change that. Going on television, this thing here, it's a camera. It's not a person. You know, I could talk to this thing I could charm the screws out of that thing if I wanted to. Why? It's just a camera. It's a mass of circuits and wires. You know, that's all it is. It's not a real person. People out there, oh, they're real people. Oh yeah, I mean they look at you funny when you're speaking, and if you're losing your train of thought, oh, they know it. That thing there has no idea. It's just gonna keep rolling. It's just. But people out there, they look at you. They make faces. They go, "Come on, come on. What are you trying to say?" You know, they look at you funny, you know, like he's doing. So you know, that's how you know that you're actually making sense. You know, I could do that forever. TV, I mean, this out here, an audience, that scares me. But I was able to, at 15 years old, I was able to get on at WKPT radio here in town. And again, the year was the late 1969, and we were the TV station had just started in August of that year. So I was working a radio shift, and also working I was also working a TV shift at the same time, announcing.
Can you start back and tell me about starting the TV station, please?
In 1969, I was able to get on while I was in high school. I was 15 years old at Dobbins Bennett. I was able to get on at WKPT radio. And in August of that year, they had just put the television station on the air to carry the ABC network. Prior to that, we were having to pick up WLOS in Asheville for ABC programming. So when they put the TV station on the air, everything was new. We had new equipment. We had new microwaves. You know, we couldn't afford to bring ABC directly into the station, so we had to pick it up off WTVK TV in Knoxville, Channel 26. That was the nearest ABC affiliate to us that we could actually get. So, and we could get LOS, but they couldn't get the microwave from there. But they got a microwave from Knoxville. So from Sharps Ridge to Camp Creek Bald to Holston Mountain to Kingsport is how the signal bounced in from ABC. And then once it went through the station, it went back to Holston Mountain to be transmitted. That was phenomenal. I mean, it was, who does that? You know, we didn't have satellites. You know, we didn't have direct lines from AT&T. We had to do it microwave. So if power went out on Camp Creek Bald down here in Greenville, our signal was dead. We didn't have an ABC signal. So what did we do? We had to take WLOS TV off the air. And if they had like a station ID or something that they threw up and we missed, we'd give a station ID, WLOS TV, Asheville, you know, and we're here, you know. I mean, who does that? Nobody does that. Nobody does that anymore, you know. I mean, but we were all learning how to do television. Everybody, this was new. This was a new thing. There's some stations here in town, channel WCYB and WJHL had been here for years. They had everything down right, but we were the startup, and we were learning things as we were going along. And so I got a chance to learn television from the ground floor up, from every frame, every line, like filing an FCC license to do things, you know. You learn that. You learned how a transmitter works, a television transmitter. You learn why, yeah, your office is downtown, you know, the studio's downtown. But guess what? Your TV station, they own a little plot of land up here on Holston Mountain. Well, why do they own land on Holston Mountain? That's where you transmitted from. You know, you learned all of that stuff. And it was absolutely fascinating to me at 15, 16 years old. And I mean, I just soaked it in. I mean, every time somebody would show me something new or tell me something, I just absorbed it. And then I would come home and I would tell my parents what I did, what all I did today, and they would just, oh, that's nice. And they'd go back to whatever it was they were doing. They had no idea. I got no encouragement at home for going into television. I think my parents thought that television was a hobby. It was just a fad. You don't make money at it. He's just doing it because it's just something to do. When he graduates high school, when he gets out of DB, he's probably going to end up over here at Eastman doing something like everybody else in Kingsport. I turned that into a 48-year career and just retired from it a year ago. It was separate but equal prior to 1965. We knew as African Americans in this school right here that there were white people out in the community. We didn't know a thing about them. We didn't know names. We didn't associate. We would drive down the street, or we'd go, when I go with my father to do jobs at individual homes, I'd see that they had kids my age, and they were white. But I never knew anything about them at all.